All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the August 28th Certification Monthly Call. My name is Christy Ballou. I am Director of Certification at LDOE. We are going to go ahead and get started this morning. We have quite a bit of information to share with you all. As a reminder, please make sure that you mute your background unless and until it is time for a question. So we'll be happy to allow you to unmute or to type in the chat. One request, if you are typing into the chat and you have the option, please submit your question to everyone instead of just an individual, so we can, those of us that are manning the chat of the department can see all the questions so we can get them answered for you. All right, so we have some special topics today. Those special topics, we have a special guest this morning. Then we will get to policy updates, certification updates, important call summary or important dates, and upcoming meetings. And then we'll have, of course, our reminders section as usual. First, I would like to go ahead and introduce our guest speaker, Anya Randall, who is the Executive Director of School Systems Financial Support.
Thank you, Christy. Good morning, everyone. As Christy said, I am Anya Randall, Executive Director for School Systems Financial Support. And this morning, I will be discussing with you all two allocations that came from our recent legislative session. The first one is the differentiated compensation allocation that was approved for school systems. So we'll get into that topic first. And then the second one is the stipends for certificated teachers and staff employees. So with differentiated compensation, what is differentiated compensation? It is an allocation that's intended to address unique market needs in the areas of recruitment and retention of teachers. It was an appropriation of about $25 million that came as a separate allocation, which was not included in the MFP formula, and it was distributed to local school districts earlier this month. And this is a policy that provides for different pay. It allows school districts to allocate different pay for teachers who are serving in different roles as educators. How was the differentiation calculated? So the way the department calculated the amount that went out to school systems was they used the number of teachers that was reported in the fall 2022 MFP staffing count. And those funds were multiplied by $409 for each teacher to generate a school systems allocation. Now, I do want to make note that you've only received funding for teachers, so it's only those individuals who are coded to object code 112 that counts as certificated teacher positions. How should these funds be utilized? The funds should be utilized to address recruitment and retention needs in any of four categories. Those categories were determined by Bessie, and they should be stipends for teachers in critical shortage areas, or they could be stipends for highly effective teachers, stipends for teachers that work in high needs schools, and high needs schools are defined by Bessie as those schools that have 85% or higher economic disadvantage rate. And then also stipends for teachers who serve in teacher leader positions. Those are the four categories in which the funds could be paid out to teachers. And then what are the critical shortage areas? The critical shortage areas are secondary math, which is math in grades 6 to 12, secondary science, which science in grades 6 to 12, and then all grades K to 12 special education. When were the funds released to school systems? These funds were already released to school districts around August 10th. They were released at one time. Just a reminder that they were intended to assist with the recruitment efforts during this fiscal year. So it's very strongly recommended that school system utilize the funds quickly to ensure that classroom teachers are hired and the classroom are adequately staffed for students for this school years. Just wanted to make note that if the funds are not totally utilized in this school year, it can be carried forward to next year. We will not take those funds back, but there will be some reporting to show how those funds were utilized in this current fiscal year. For accounting purposes, and we also know that there are some HR people that handle your PEP report. So how should the funds be accounted for? It is recommended that these funds are accounted for in a special fund within a general fund. They should be reported in Key Punch Code 6250, which is also account code 3290. Again, this is most information for your accounting staff, but some HR staff use this code also. And then it's also important to know that your local governing board should make sure that they approve the distribution of the stipends prior to compensating employees. So however your board deem that it's necessary that they will be paying out the stipends to these teachers to assist in this recruitment and retention effort, please make sure that it is approved and included in salary schedules prior to compensating employees. We've had several questions regarding the differentiated compensation allocation, which is why we're making sure to deliver professional development around this topic. And some of the frequently asked questions, we'll go over the ones that we've received thus far. Can these funds supplant previous initiatives that districts had implemented for this purpose? No, it is the legislators' intent to grant additional funds so that there can be additional initiatives on top of what has already been implemented locally. Must the district compensate every teacher at $409 for the approved stipends? No, the districts can use their own discretion to determine what amount they would like to provide the stipends in whatever one of those four categories. However, the $409 was just used as an allocation method for each teacher in the district. But the funds, the stipend to be paid out does not have to be at a rate of $409. Can these funds be used in other critical shortage areas? No, the districts must allocate the stipends to teachers in the critical shortage areas that have only been defined by BESI. If you would like additional guidance, our office have published guidance regarding differentiated compensation, and it can be found on our funding page on the website. Once you're on that page, you click the Business Manager Support Library, and then there's a toolbox that says state allocations. There's a guidance document included in the state allocations for differentiated compensation, where you can find additional information on differentiated compensation. The next allocation that we'll talk about is the certificated and support staff allocation. That is the $2,000 per certificated staff and $1,000 per support staff. That was an allocation to provide a one-time non-recurring stipend to all staff in school districts. This was an appropriation that was outside of the MFP formula, so it is a separate one-time allocation that will not be occurring again. The calculation method of these funds was used based on the full-time equivalent staff counts that was reported in EdLinks 360 for the collection system for fall 2022 annual reporting. The funds were allocated by multiplying the number of eligible full-time equivalent positions by the stipend amounts for both certificated and support staff. The object and function code combinations reported in the fall 2022 staffing data collection for each position determined how those positions were classified, whether they were certificated or support. And here, I will not read over all the bullets, but this slide gives you a list of those positions that were included in the certificated staff count. It is usually positions that require a teaching or school leadership certificate. They are classified as certificated personnel, and there's your listing of eligible positions. Our next slide gives us the positions that are included to be support staff. This is your positions that do not require a teaching or school leadership position. So therefore, they are classified as support personnel. I'm sorry, a teaching or school leadership certificate. And so they are classified as support personnel serving in those positions. And the bullets give us examples of those type of positions. There is a group of positions who are not included in the allocation at all. That means that you did not receive any certificated amount or support amount for these positions. The positions that are ineligible to be included in the staff data are those that are associated with pre-K, or if you're a district that have Head Start programs, those positions are not eligible and were not included in any of the allocations for differentiated compensation. Also, they were not included in anything here in the stipends. When will the funds be released? It had a release date of today, August 28th. However, some banks posted early, so we have received notice that some districts have already received their funds. Districts are receiving the entire allocation all at one time. And also just wanted to make note that the associated employer retirement cost for the stipend was funded at 24.1% for certificated, 27.6% for support. We do know that there are some support staff that pay into retirement, that you pay the employer contribution at the 24.1%, but the department did compensate the support staff at the higher rate, which is 27.6%. Like with differentiated compensation, we have received some questions regarding these fundings. So we'll go over the most common questions that we've received thus far. Is the allocation limited to staff paid with general fund in the staff count? No, all positions, regardless of the funding source, was included in the allocation. So if you had positions that were funded through any federal sources or other sources, those positions were included in your staff data. Therefore, you did receive an allocation no matter what the funding source was. So can federal funds be utilized to pay the allocation for federally funded staff? No, the allocation does include funding for all federally funded staff. Therefore, you're expected to use the allocations for to pay out those stipends. However, as I noted on a previous slide, there was not any funds for pre-K or Head Start positions. So you could use pre-K or Head Start funding to fund those stipends. If your board want to grant stipends for those positions, you'll just have to make sure that your budget that is included in your budget, and your board approve that those employees should receive the stipends also. Are resident teachers included in the staff count? No, resident teachers are not included in the staff count. Therefore, they were not included in the allocation. Are there requirement timelines to issue the stipends to employees? Yes, the distribution schedule is a local decision, but the stipend should be paid prior to May 1st, 2024. So whereas you may want to pay it all late fall or half in the fall, half in the spring. What we have advised is that it's all paid out by May 1st, because there will be some reporting requirements next spring in which you will have to submit a report to LDOE that notifies us of how the stipends were provided to your staff. So you can, it's a local decision as far as how the funds will be distributed, but they must be paid prior to May 1st. There is additional guidance on this topic, as is with differentiated compensation. It provides additional information and can answer some other questions in our business manager support library that's on the funding tab. Also in the portal with state allocations, you'll see a guidance document for differentiated compensation and certificated and support stipends. If there's any other questions that you may have surrounding those topics, please do not hesitate to reach out to our office. The number and email is provided on this slide. I think that's all I have. So I would like to thank our staff for allowing the finance department to provide an update to district human resources and personnel liaison across the state to make sure that this information is provided to the personnel staff and also our finance staff. Thank y'all for the time and attention today.
Thank you for joining. Dr. Jeffrion?
Yes, Christy, we weren't able to hear you.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
All right, so our next special guest that's going to be providing policy updates will be Dr. Arthur Jofrion. He is Executive Director of Certification and Ethics.
Good morning from the Office of Teaching and Learning, Division of Educator Certification and Ethics. As Ms. Ballou mentioned, my name is Arthur Jofrion, and I am serving as the Executive Director of Educator Certification and Ethics. Because of recent legislative changes and additional responsibilities added to our team, we are in the process of expanding. We've also made a commitment to better serve you, our most important stakeholders. Last week, our team processed nearly 1,100 applications, and we're processing well over 60% of the applications received within 15 business days. Congratulations to our amazing team, many of which are on the call today. This morning, I'm going to be sharing several pieces of legislation that were brought to and approved by Bessie last week. Several changes have been made and will impact your work. You will note changes to several sections of Bulletin 746 that include grade point average requirements that are going to be shared by Ms. Rachel Norman, the removal of TA certificates, which will be discussed by Ms. Ballou, and updates to criminal background checks that will be shared with you by Ms. Paula Bell. Next slide. So the Bulletin 741 will have some revisions that are going to include the new teacher, associate teacher program. This program allows for individuals age 25 with a cleared background check and an associate's degree to become a teacher of record in a related field. These individuals will be required to enroll in an undergraduate teacher preparation program, receive mentoring, and participate in weekly teacher collaboration through professional development, such as clusters or cadres. Our office will not be issuing these certificates for individuals. Local systems will issue the permit and retain documentation for any associate teacher employees that you hire. Any questions regarding the associate teacher program can be emailed to me, arthur.jofrion@la.gov. Act 63 requires changes to several sections of Bulletin 746, and those include sections 103, 507, and 519. These updates allow for the use of successful evaluations from a variety of settings, including out-of-state, non-public, and even third-party evaluations. Third-party evaluations do have to be provided by providers who are approved by BESI, and more detailed information will be shared shortly. Act 371 amended regulations for active military and the spouse of active military personnel. These changes are going to be found in sections 507, 511 of Bulletin 746, and do note that when the department receives a completed application, we do have to process those applications within 20 days. So we will have a special flag added to those applications. Act 392 created many changes to Bulletin 746. These include conditional acceptance into teacher preparation programs with grade point average flexibility, updates to literacy requirements, out-of-state reciprocity, teacher certification appeals council membership changes, and expanded options for TEPs, as well as the removal of TAs. Please note that there are changes to special education exams due to an ETS redesign and phasing out of certain exams. To comply with policy, there is a 1-year implementation period. And finally, note that there have been some revisions to policy regarding resident teachers serving as substitutes. It's important to note that they may serve as a substitute, but this service cannot impede the residency, and serving as a long-term substitute is not recommended. At this time, I'll turn the call over to my colleague, Ms. Ballou.
Thank you, Dr. Joffrion. Can everyone hear me okay? All right. So next we will get started with the certification updates that will be taking place in relation to all of these legislative and policy updates. So the first reaction or response to all this policy changes is, of course, since policy was adopted with these changes, we are going to have to update all of our applications. The expected timeline that we have for all, it's like 30 applications that we have to update, for all of them to be updated are October 1st. We are aware that some applications will need to be posted prior to this date, although all of those applications will still have that October 1 revision date to make it simpler for our staff and for you all, that they will have all the same revision date. So that means that in keeping with our normal 1-month overlap period, beginning November 1st, all applications will have to be on that October 1st version of the application. Another change that we are making in sync with this November 1st deadline is, the main and only reason that we put applications on hold these days are for lacking evidence of payment receipt. So we are no longer going to be putting those applications on hold if they are lacking evidence of a payment receipt. We're just going to close those out unprocessed, and you'll have to start from scratch. That will be happening beginning November 1st. You will no longer see any applications on hold for payment. So as Dr. Joffrion mentioned, crediting of evaluations is allowed now for a multitude of scenarios. So we are going to be allowed in the certification office to use evaluations appropriate to the type of school setting in which the teacher served. So this change will specifically allow our folks in the non-public setting to advance or renew those ancillary service or those ancillary teaching, certificates and those EDL certificates where they were not allowed to do so before. Essentially, if an educator served in a public school, we're going to be looking for compass evaluations. If they served in a non-public school, we'll be looking for local personnel evaluations. If they're contracted to a public school that is a BESI-approved entity, we'll be looking for employer evaluations from that BESI-approved entity. Now, keep in mind that no scores reflected in Compass need to be submitted on the local personnel evaluation attestation. We have in our technology a window to where we can see those evaluations. Compass evaluations are only submitted via the Compass Information System or CIS. Also keep in mind that local evaluations cannot be used for educators serving in a public school to replace missing or incomplete Compass evaluations. Employer evaluations can only be used if an educator is contracted to a public school by a BESI-approved entity. And then, of course, any out-of-state experience, regardless of the service type, public, non-public, or contracted, must still be verified on that out-of-state experience verification attestation form. So because service history will need to clearly be identified, that experience verification form is now going to be a required document for pretty much all of our certification applications. It's going to be for most of them. So it's paramount that each year of service is clearly identified and captured on the appropriate form. As a result of all these exciting changes, and now, mind you, they're exciting but complicated, beginning September 1st, that means we're not going to, we're going to no longer issue a non-public or an asterisk certificate. So if someone is holding a non-public or an asterisk certificate, at the renewal of that certificate, we're actually going to issue a standard certificate without that asterisk at the same level. The same holds true for advancing. So when they're advancing, any new certificates will be standard, not the asterisk, regardless of the evaluations that were used. Now, any educators currently holding a non-public certificate and wishing to be issued that standard certificate without the asterisk, they may go ahead and apply for renewal as soon as the required evaluations can be verified, even if it's more than 90 days from the expiration of that certificate, if they want to go ahead and get that non-asterisk certificate. Some other policy changes were around the reinstatement of lifetime certificates. As you all know, a lifetime certificate will lapse for disuse if the certificate holder allows 5 consecutive calendar years to pass without regularly being employed as a teacher of record for at least 1 semester or 90 consecutive days. Those lapsed certificates may now be reactivated by a request from the employing school system at the previously attained level for a 5-year period. During that 5-year reactivation period, the holder must earn at least 3 effective evaluations from one of those various ways that they can now earn those evaluations. Once that educator earns 3 effective evaluations, that educator and the school system may go ahead and reapply for reinstatement of that lifetime validity. So that means that semester hours of coursework are no longer required for reinstatement of a certificate. I know there are some of you like doing praise hands and clapping in the background on that one. So that's an exciting change as well. We realize it's difficult to get coursework in when you're trying to do all those many things in the classroom. So the next change is around the military OS. As a part of this application revision process, as Dr. Joffrion mentioned, we are going to be creating a new application specific to the active military applicant certified in another state. We plan to have this application available sometime in September. There will also be a new application type created in the online portal specific to OS military candidates. That's that flag that we are creating so that when an application is submitted, we have a flag saying it is military so that we can pull those and expedite those appropriately. We're going to prioritize them and process them within 20 days of receipt. Now, keep in mind this processing time is only available to complete application submissions. Any application submission that's missing information or documents, of course, is not subject to this processing time. So it is paramount to make sure, number one, that the appropriate application type is chosen in the drop-down menu in the online portal. And number two, help your candidates make sure that they have all of the necessary documents included as a part of that application. Now, the other change around military families and certificates is, if they have an OS and they go ahead and qualify for exam exemption, then we'll move them on to the standard certificate. However, if a military candidate does not already qualify for that exam exemption or advancement, then what we're going to issue them is a 5-year military OS certificate. During that educator's time on the military OS, at least 3 effective evaluation ratings must be obtained to advance to the higher certificate. Basically, those 3 effective evaluations serve as a substitute for the passage of Louisiana's required exams. And so that means that for a military candidate, any 3 years of effective ratings can qualify the candidate for exam exemption, whether they're in state or out of state, before the issuance of the OS or after. So if they already don't qualify for exam exemption, this is another way for that to happen. Our out-of-state certificate was updated a little bit. It changed, the out-of-state policy has changed in 2 ways. The 2 ways that it's changed is, first, that the 3 years, this is for normal out-of-state certificates. This is not applicable to the military that I was just speaking about. The 3 years of successful teaching experience allowed for exam exemption must occur prior to first employment or licensure in Louisiana in the education setting. So for the years of service to be counted, it has to happen prior to both of those things. The second way that it's changed is that if a candidate is applying through the out-of-state route for certification and has not successfully taught for at least 1 year in the 5 years preceding the date of application in Louisiana, a 1-year OS will be issued, during which time the candidate must earn effective evaluation ratings to be issued the 3-year OS. So again, just like with the reinstatement for the lifetime certificate, 6 semester hours are no longer required for the advancement to that 3-year OS. Now, the 3-year OS does remain a non-renewable certificate, during which time that educator must take and pass the Louisiana required exams in alignment with his or her preparation area. The temporary employment permit. So that permit pathway has 4 options now. Last year we had the graduate degree option and the teacher preparation option, as long as they did everything except meeting the exams with 10%. This year, they've expanded that pathway to include 2 additional ways that they can be put on a temporary employment permit. The first way is through the bachelor degree area candidate option. Now, that particular option indicates that, of course, it has to be, all TEPs must be in a shortage area. So, of course, you as the LEA is going to attest to no other certified candidate available. But for this particular pathway, it can only be for a secondary shortage area. Now, that degree has to be in alignment with the shortage area that they're teaching, and that degree has to be from an accredited institution, and they have to have a 2.5 GPA on that undergraduate degree. In addition to that, these candidates also have to have passed all the content exams that are in alignment with both the degree and the classes taught. So that's the bachelor's degree option. The next option is for an in-state program completer who has a GPA of less than 2.5 for their program. And so
Ms. Ballou.
Yes.
Change the slide, please. You're still on the out of state.
Oh, so sorry. Thank you so much. So that last option for the program completers in state, they have to have a GPA. If they have a GPA less than 2.5, they do have an option for certification on this TEP. Again, as mentioned earlier, all TEPs must be issued in a shortage area. So as I mentioned earlier, the LEA must attest to no other certified candidate available. Candidates not completing teacher prep must complete a pre-service training prior to the first day with students. Candidates do have to be mentored each year for renewal. While they're on that certificate each year for renewal, they also must receive a successful rating. Those ratings have to be effective proficient or higher. After 3 successful evaluations on the TEP, mentoring is not required, but it is encouraged. And then after 5 years on the TEP, again, with those effective evaluations at effective proficient or higher, and of course, upon the school system attesting to and recommending them for employment for the next year, they can advance to a standard level certificate. Now, the years on the TEP do not count towards tenure. We have some literacy policy updates that we are continuing with to make some adjustments. Of course, in alignment with 2021 legislation last year, literacy policy updates were approved regarding the science of reading competencies. Those competencies are definitely required for all literacy coursework. Teacher preparation providers do have some time to design and restructure their teacher prep literacy coursework, including those for add-on requirements. The changes for add-on literacy coursework do include the requirement for 9 semester hours of literacy coursework for special education areas, and all of that is now effective beginning in the fall of 2024. So beginning with the 2024-2025 school year, program completers are required to have the updated literacy foundations or science of reading aligned coursework. For initial preparation, semester or contact hours only may be accepted for these literacy requirements. However, for add-on, semester hours, contact hours, the adopted teaching of reading exam, or the literacy foundations training can be accepted for the number of hours approved per program. Please keep in mind that each approved literacy foundations training program is approved for differing amounts of hours. So as soon as we get those all situated out with our literacy team, we will be providing some updated guidance documents on that so that a candidate can see how much their literacy foundations training is worth. We do
Christy,
have, yes.
We have a question, Christy, from Cindy Duhan.
Sure. How can I help you, Cindy?
Christy, can you go back to the literacy? It just went a little too fast for me. I'm sorry.
Sure.
I want to make sure I understand. Can you review that slide one more time? It just went a little too fast.
Sure. You know, we've been updating this policy for quite some time. They do have to have the literacy coursework. You all, as program providers, do have some time to align your coursework. The way that the policy reads is that beginning with the 2024-2025 school year, program completers are required to have the updated literacy foundation coursework or science of reading aligned coursework for their completers. We're going to be looking for that certification for completers after September 1st of next year. It does include that mild, moderate, or special education areas that do require 9 semester hours for that coursework. That's for both initial and add-on requirements. All of that begins September 1st of 2024.
Okay, I thought I heard you say something about there were some other things we could use in lieu of that. No?
So for add-on only. So yes, for initial preparation, it's semester hours or contact hours. If you're a semester hour granting institution, we're looking for transcripts with semester hours. If you're a private provider that you don't have a way to provide semester hours, we're looking for contact hours for the initial preparation. Now for add-on, it's a little bit different. A teacher candidate can go to any university for an add-on. We don't necessarily approve universities for add-on per se, for a holistic add-on. We will be looking at, I'll say, approval with air quotes of the literacy coursework in coming months that's specific to that. But for add-on, they can use, a teacher candidate can use semester hours, they can use contact hours, they can use the adopted teaching of reading exam, or they can use the professional development in their school system, the Literacy Foundations training. Now, it depends on the provider that they did that through as to the number of hours that they'll get credit towards, and we'll post that rubric and those hours once we get that finalized from the literacy team. But that is for add-on only, where they can use those other options. For initial, it has to be semester hours or contact hours.
Thank you. That clarifies. Thank you so much.
Sure.
And Christy, do you have a timeline on when the department will know the hours that'll be granted for the various science of reading courses that might have already been taken? I know you mentioned like we want us to plan ahead for our candidates and make sure that we're communicating effectively with them.
Sure. We are meeting regularly with the literacy team. We haven't had a finalized document prepared just yet. I expect it'll be in the coming weeks, but I really will have to go with the literacy team to get that. We kind of have an idea, but we just don't have a finalized document just yet. Dr.
And so Kyle,
would add there.
yeah, Kyle, just to add a little bit of clarity, one of the trainings that many districts did that was a 2-year process is going to count for 9 semester hours. There was one training that was a 1-year course that's going to count for 6. And then there was a second 1-year option that's going to count for 3. But we're waiting for the literacy team to officially release that before we release any further information.
Okay. And just a follow-up question. Is this a different timeline for implementation? I think I remember seeing like a Jan 1 science of reading deadline. You had told us that all current candidates really needed to apply before January 1, or these new policies would go into effect at that point.
So are you talking about the exam? Because there's 2 different pieces to the literacy policies. There's one around the exam and there is one around the coursework.
Yeah, I guess it's more for us, it's our add-on contingents. I know that in some of our conversations with the district or the department, there's been some question about whether how much our contact hours would count towards this. And I didn't know if that had been set or not. When you say 9 semester hours, 45 hours of contact, we're certifying that and sending it on up at this point. But
so when I say 9 semester hours, since you're a private provider, it would be the equivalent contact hours that we would accept. Yes. All right. So if there are no other questions there, let's go ahead and move on to the literacy exam update. You know, in 2022, there was some legislation passed through Act 448, which required all kindergarten teachers, kindergarten through 3rd grade teachers seeking initial certification to pass a scientifically researched evidence-based teaching of reading exam. So this particular assessment, we are working with ETS to replace the existing multiple subjects praxis exam. Originally, we were hoping to have it ready in the fall. The update here is that it will not be adopted and ready for use in 2023 as previously anticipated. So your currently enrolled and prospective teachers can continue to take that elementary multiple subjects exam 5001, and that will be accepted. And again, even when the new one is adopted, it can be for someone going forward. What's happening is that ELA portion is being released or replaced with the teaching of reading exam. The other piece that you need to be aware is that, you know, the legislation did say beginning January 1st of 2024, an applicant applying for initial certification to teach K through 3rd grade has to have this scientifically based, evidence-based reading instruction, teaching of reading exam. That current adopted exam is the 5205 teaching of reading and has a passing score of 159. As I mentioned, we're working with ETS to make available an elementary multiple subjects exam that includes the teaching of reading as part of that ELA subtest, so they won't have to take an additional exam. That exam will be available as a bundle for the multiple subjects exam or as individual subtests. Now, if an educator has already completed this elementary multiple subjects exam, they can just take that teaching of reading exam because that standalone one, because it will be available. And we are working with ETS and we'll provide updates as we get them. Now, if you look at the next slide, we did update the policy around this particular piece, and you see we've quoted on the slide deck the policy that says candidates already enrolled in that year-long residency and holding either that PL or the R prior to January 1st of 2025 are not subject to the provision of taking this teaching of reading exam. Now, we did want to provide some clarification in a way that you can think of who needs what, because it is two pieces.
Excuse me,
around
I have a question before you clarify this. If you could go back to the previous slide, where you're just talking about the literacy exam. Yes, exactly. Thank you. So you mentioned the elementary subjects exam 5001. I believe that's all parts of all subsets of the entire exam.
Yeah.
Are you saying that candidates, like, if they just wanted to take in isolation, just like the math, science, and social studies, they can continue to do that and then hold off on taking the 5002 because they'll be taking the literacy exam? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I would recommend they go ahead and take the current exam, because if you take a look at the next slide, any candidate that is enrolled in the year-long residency and holding the PL or the R prior to January 1st of 2025 won't have to take this teaching of reading exam. Period.
So can
Do
they
you
still
realize,
take
though,
each
that-
part of the exam in isolation or no?
Yes. Yes, they can.
Okay.
So where you have on the previous slide, where you have for certification before 2023, so December 31st, 2023. Like, we have students that are being accepted into the program now, and they still have 3 years to go. So why would we would tell them not to take that other one, right? And wait. I mean, like, how long is it going to be before this is part of the multiple tests, the multiple subjects test? Because we're telling them already they have to take 5 tests. So this is 6 tests.
So we plan to have an update. Well, for candidate, you're talking about for undergrad candidate, I'm assuming what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Or anybody who wants to be a teacher who's
Right.
seeking certification.
Well, it depends on if you're an undergrad or an alt cert candidate, because your timeline is going to be different, and you have to have your content exam prior to enrolling if you're alt cert. You don't have to have that if you're an undergrad candidate.
Okay. So undergrads.
So for undergrads, you can tell them, because I'm assuming you don't have them take their exams until before their residency.
That's not correct. They
No,
take
that's
the-
not correct. We try to get them to take that as soon as possible,
Right.
like well before, especially if they're enrolled in an undergraduate program, so that by the time they graduate and hopefully enter into an all-cert program, that's one less hurdle they have to consider at that exact moment. So no, that's
Sure.
not.
Sure. So then I would encourage them to take all but that ELA subtest portion, the other 3, and then
That's
one.
great.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that's the reason why I was I think it may be misleading, because it says 5001, and that includes all parts of the praxis exam versus just the 5002. So it just might be confusing to candidates, because they can continue to take the math, science, and social studies, but maybe hold off on the ELA. I think that would be the message.
Sure. We can update that. Thank you. So back to this slide here, keep in mind that any candidate that's already enrolled in your year-long residency and holding either the PL or the R prior to January 5, they won't have to take this teaching of reading exam. So to clarify around this exam, who needs to take it, who doesn't, because there's been some questions about that as far as the areas of certification. K-12 certification candidates do not need to take this exam. special education certification candidates will need to take this exam. So essentially, if an educator is required to take the 9 hours of literacy, then they also will have to take that teaching and reading exam. If the educator is not required to have the 9 hours for literacy, then the teaching and reading exam is not required. So that might be a helpful way to think through that. And then as we get updates from the literacy team and update policy, we do expect there will be some further updates in coming months with policy. And that's likely going to happen when we bring that add-on policy. Once we do that, we will provide you with more updates. All right, so I will turn it over to my colleague, Rachel Norman.
See, first, it looks like we have a hand raised from UNO.
Yes, I just had a quick question. All the correspondence says kindergarten to 3rd grade certification. Does this also affect elementary 1st through 5th grade certification?
Yes, because they are authorized to teach in 1st through 3rd grade, it would be applicable there. So it's 2 certification areas that you're looking at, the K to 3 and the 1 to 5, or the PK to 3 and the 1 to 5, because of the way our structure works.
Is that noted in the policy? Because on the slide, it's not.
It is noted in the policy, yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to GPA flexibility. This is one of the big things that was brought back into the policy. So for candidates that do not possess the minimum of a 2.2 undergraduate grade point average at the time of degree conferral, those candidates can now be conditionally admitted into a VESI approved teacher preparation program. Conditional admittance does require the following. If a program does award credit hours or semester hours, the candidate is required to obtain a 3.0 GPA by the end of the first 12 semester hours of the program. The candidate must also obtain a 2.5 cumulative GPA at the time of completion of this program. And for those teacher prep programs that do not award credit hours, those applicants are required to demonstrate the master of competencies as required by the program and the school system in which the clinical practice is completed. And in both these situations for conditional admittance, before graduation or program completion, the candidate is also required to complete all requirements set forth by VESI, including the requirements for clinical practice. Yes, ma'am. Ms. Cindy, you have a question?
Yes, sorry, I was looking for the mute button. Okay, I'm a little confused. So now the GPA requirement is a 2.2 because prior we had no flexibility lower than a 2.5.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Yes.
and then my second part is I'm concerned that if I admit someone with a 2.2, they're not going to have an overall 2.5 with just 26 hours in a program when they have probably 120 to 130 hours accumulated. So are we talking about 2.5 in the program completion hours or overall undergraduate?
For the 2.5 within the first 12 hours?
No.
I mean, the 3.0. So the
Yeah,
3.0 is
not
at
the
the end of the semester hours of the program.
Yeah, the 3.0 I get, but it also says and must complete with a 2.5. Just the program hours, just the 26 hours in the program must be a 2.5, not their overall GPA, correct? Because some of them mathematically is going to be impossible.
It sounds like you're talking about.
I can't hear her.
Yeah, Christy, you may have cut out on us.
I think what Christy was trying to say is it sounds like you're talking about undergrad. Is that correct?
Yes.
So you're
I'm
talking
sorry,
about
no, I'm talking about alt certs, but if I have an alt cert that already has a bachelor's degree, that means they already have 120 to 130 hours. And so if I admit them,
It sounds like you're talking about an undergraduate program versus an alt cert program. Is that correct?
I'm talking about an alt cert program. Is this undergrad or is this alt cert?
Now I can't hear you this weekend. Hang on.
Yeah.
Prior to this, the 2.5 was a program GPA.
Yes, so for alt cert, the 2.2 GPA for admission would be their undergraduate cumulative GPA.
Mhm. Correct.
But then the 2.5 on program completion is just the alt cert program coursework. We wouldn't add that to their undergraduate degree to figure out what their completion it would just be their coursework within the program.
That was my
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, so in this case, it would be the 26 hours or, whatever, 33, 36, whatever is required of your post-bac candidates.
Okay, that was my question. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. And what's different from this GPA flexibility versus the GPA flexibility that was in place prior to is the flexibility policy is we removed the requirement for the structured interview. So in lieu of the interview, approved teacher prep program providers can determine additional conditional admittance requirements if they so choose. However, in doing that, minimum entrance requirements as outlined in 746 and Bulletin 996, such as the requirement for the passage of any praxis exams, content exams, non-education baccalaureate degree, those will still remain the same. So that's going to be the conditional GPA or the GPA flexibility for entrance into a program. We also brought back the GPA flexibility for the temporary authority to teach. So any candidate with less than the 2.2 undergrad GPA, for those individuals being hired by the school systems, those educators, unlike the PL, they will be required to submit to a structured district interview for issuance of this. And we did link in that hyperlink some suggestions on questions to ask. So it can be things like, why do you want to be a teacher? What do you expect that being a teacher candidate will require in terms of time and commitment, areas to improve? Tell us about a time that you had to work with people who came from a different background, how to build effective relationships. And just keep in mind, like, these are just suggestions. Again, we do include those in the link, and certainly feel free to use, that when you are interviewing your candidates. As Dr. Jofrion mentioned earlier, for the special education exams, ETS, which is Educational Testing Services, is redesigning and retiring the existing special ed exams. It's moving from 3 special ed exams to 2. The 2 general sped exams, which is the 5354 and the 5543, are now being replaced with 1 general special education exam, which is a foundational knowledge exam with the test code 5355 with an adopted passing score of 145. The 5545 is being redesigned and replaced with the special ed severe to profound exam, which is the 5547, which requires a passing score of 156. And just like any other time where we phase out and adopt new exams, there is that 1-year overlap requirement. So we'll be accepting those exams through August 31st, 2024. And the newly adopted exams will be available for use and can be taken beginning September 1st of this year, 2023. Also, the deaf and hard of hearing, mild to moderate visually impaired and blind areas of certification will now require the 5355, and the significant disability will require the 5547. So I'm going to go back really quick because for the tax, it does look like we have some questions in the chat. Whose responsibility, and this is from Rapids, whose responsibility is it to keep up with meeting the GPA requirements? Well, we have to submit transcripts showing semester hour GPA each time for TAT renewal. For TAT renewal, the TAT renewal requirements are still going to be the same. It's going to be the standards of effectiveness and attempting a content exam required for entrance into a program twice. Ms. Ann, does that answer your question?
It sounds like there was a little confusion.
Okay, she said thank you. And then Miss Melinda Hardy, she's mentioned, does the GPA flexibility apply to tax? Yes, ma'am, it does. So then the last one is the Teacher Certification Appeals Council. All membership, which is a 9-membership association for TSAC, is codified in law. So updates were made to allow for equivalent associations to be named by BESI in any event where a named association or nominating entity does dissolve. And we actually had that happen this past year, where LACE, which is the Louisiana Association of School Executives, is we were informed that they are in the process of dissolving. So to be counterproductive, we worked with BESI to have a different association, which is LAP, the Louisiana Association of Principals. They were named as a nominating entity for TSAC. So we will be reaching out to that association, LAP, to begin the soliciting of nominees for memberships on the Teacher Certification Appeals Council within the coming weeks, and are hopeful to have that individual nominated and confirmed by BESI for our potentially our October, or maybe even beginning for the 2024 school year for the Teacher Certification Appeals Council. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to my colleague, who will pick up on the next few slides.
Yes, one quick thing, I was looking at some questions around the literacy. It seems like there's a little bit of confusion around the literacy. There are two different pieces of literacy policy. There's the policy around the semester hours and the policy around the exam. Two different sections of literacy policy. We will take a look at all of the questions in the chat and make sure we get those answered. But for now, we're going to keep on rolling because we are already a little bit past time. We have some important information to get to you all for criminal history reporting. And I'm going to turn it over to Paula Bell.
Hey, good morning. Law and policy were updated recently to prohibit certification of individuals with certain offenses. This would include convictions of an offense listed in RS 15587.1 or any felony offense. In the list of 15587.1 offenses, drug distribution offenses are considered prohibited as never evers. For those issued a credential or having an appeal pending prior to July 1st, 2023, who may have the drug distribution offenses, they've been grandfathered in from that provision. So any subsequent conviction of that nature will now be considered a never ever, as indicated in law. Appeals to BESI, and we sometimes synonymously use the word appeals, but it's a records review process, to BESI may be allowed for some offenses after a specified period of time. So there's details surrounding this that are outlined in Chapter 19 of Bulletin 746. Beginning January 1st, 2025, an applicant for initial certification shall undergo a background check for certification. The process for this is still in the development stages, but updates will be provided when we have all that ironed out. In the meantime, we, the LDOE, will check wrap backs for anyone already certified when an educator tries to advance, renew, or otherwise modify their certificate. And additionally, we may obtain a criminal history check if it is needed. The policy for when a new criminal history will be needed has not yet been codified, but we expect to propose those policy revisions in the spring. So currently on the teachlouisiana.net website, the LDOE discloses the identities of any person whose credential has been sanctioned. Sanctions would include denials, suspensions, or revocations. These identities can be found using the verification of a teaching authorization or credential search feature. So it's not a list that we post there. It's when you query an individual's credential. So you could use their name, or if you're an authenticated HR or prep provider user, you could search using their social security number. And there it will show if any action has ever been taken. It is visible on that educator certification record. Suspensions, revocations, and denials occur if an educator has a felony conviction or a conviction for an offense listed in 15.587.1, or if an educator submits any type of fraudulent documentation to the LDOE or to BESI, or if an educator has been found to have facilitated cheating on any kind of state assessment. Expunged convictions and equivalent convictions or actions in other states are still considered for licensure sanctions. So just because it's expunged doesn't mean that for education licensure purposes, it means we still have to consider those. An employing school system may choose to use the fact that an educator has a certificate issued by us, if it has not been suspended, denied, or revoked, to determine that an individual has not been convicted of a prohibited criminal offense. Therefore, a background check is no longer required for the employment of LDOE certified credentialed individuals. Employing school systems still have the option and authority to request a fingerprint-based background check on all new and transfer employees, even if they are certified. That's the best practice, is to complete a background check on any new and transferred employees, regardless of their licensure status, but that is up to you. Employing school systems are still required to complete fingerprint-based background checks on any and all uncertified personnel. So recent legislation requires an administrator, teacher, or other school employee to notify his employer and the LDOE of all final convictions or no contest pleas, excluding traffic offenses within 2 business days. So this is the reporting requirements. A couple of things to note with this. The law states that administrator, teacher, or school employee who fails to report their conviction or plea to the department shall be fined no more than $1,000 or imprisoned for no more than a year, with or without hard labor, or possibly both. Also to note, upon receiving a report of a final conviction or plea of guilty or nolo contendere to any criminal offense, excluding those traffic offenses, of course, by an employee holding a teaching certificate or authorization issued by the state board, a school system shall report the fact of the conviction or the plea to us at the Department of Education within 2 business days. Of course, that's exclusive of your weekends and holidays, and we would, excluding those timeframes, we see 2 business days. Additionally, the LDOE will notify the last known employing school system that employed the person of a suspension or revocation. So if we have to take action and you are the last known employer, we will notify you as well. The reasons why the credential sanction was made will not be disclosed, only that the sanction was taken. So again, suspensions, revocations, denials only occur if the person has a felony conviction or conviction for an offense in 15.587.1, if an educator submits fraudulent documentation to us or BESI, or if they have been found cheating, to have facilitated cheating on any state assessment. And finally, we know that we've mentioned this in previous calls, but the action occurred over the summer and was officially codified in BESI policy last week. So we thought we'd add this in here and reiterate that TA, as of June 14, 2023, per Act 392, the TA is no longer being issued. This authorization is not needed to pursue employment as a sub or uncertified teacher or administrator at a public charter or non-public school, although LEAs are still responsible for administering a criminal background check on all employees prior to hiring, as per RS 1715 and 15.587.1. So any TA application in queue will be closed if it hasn't already. I believe we have, and we are sending language back to you indicating such that we've closed it. So TAs already issued are still valid for the period and place of employment. The LDOE will continue to monitor those wrapbacks received on an educator with a TA, and we will respond to one of the, if necessary, we will respond to one of the reasons for licensure sanction as previously stated, and we will take action accordingly. So I think our next slide is our Q&A, and I'll turn it over to Christy Ballou to handle it from here.
All right, thank you for that, Paula. There were a few questions in the chat that I'm supposed to answer.
You're breaking up, Christy. I'm sorry.
Is that better? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Questions.
Paula, can I ask a question about the criminal offense?
Explain the difference between the September 1st, 2028 date for dyslexia being required in a program and the 2024-2025 academic year date that's previously been stated. So that sounds like that is a preparation question about the dyslexia course specifically. And keep in mind, there's a whole lot of literacy requirements. We have the hours of the coursework, that's one requirement. We have the exam, that's another requirement. And then you have the dyslexia course that has to be included as a part of those literacy hours as well. And so I'm not sure that I'm completely understanding that question. I believe that was from, let's see who that was from.
Oh, the question was for me. So in the what we looked at the Bessie meeting.
Can you clarify that question?
Christy, I believe she's speaking.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can hear us.
So in the paperwork that was at the Bessie meeting for the Bulletin 7046 and the changes, on the 4th page of those changes under professional level certificates, it says beginning September 1st, 2028, the requirements include a minimum of the 3 hours of teaching students with dyslexia. But in the past, we've been told that Act 606. I'm sorry. Act 607 says that we have to have it in by 2024-2025 school year. So I'm just trying to clarify if we actually have to have it in next year or if it's 2028.
Christy, were you able to hear the question from Jan?
I was not able to hear the question from Jan. I'm sorry for the technology issues this morning. Can you hear me okay? Apparently I can get a speaker working or a mic working, but not both at the same time.
I can hear you now.
I'll email it.
Okay, yes, thank you. If you can hear me okay, the next question was, are the literacy hours for all content areas K-12 or just K-3 certification? So the science of reading literacy training coursework, that is required for all areas. Now, depending on which grade band will determine how many hours you need. So that's one piece. It's the 3, 6, and the 9. You know, the 3 for the secondary, the 6 for the middle school, the 9 for the elementary, and for the special education areas. That's the hours, or the semester hours, or the equivalent contact hours. The test is something separate. There was a question about slide 36 saying that K-3 was not mentioned, and that's because the slide 36 is specific to the coursework, and so it's not just for K-3 certifications. Slide 36 is in relation to the literacy hours in general. They all have to be aligned with the science of reading competencies. And then there was a question about how do we handle TAT renewals that are being denied before the finalization of VAM for schools in Compass. I would recommend not requesting renewal until it's finalized, or you can apply, be denied, and ask for an extension on that. when do the new special education practice tests become effective? They become effective September 1st of this year, but our current exams don't expire until August 31st of next year. There's a question from Cheryl. Does the OS1 apply to out-of-state PLs also, such as Grand Canyon? Cheryl, you're going to have to clarify. I'm not sure about that, what you're asking. Jan, I did not hear your question, but we had someone type in the chat, Rebecca on the call. And Rebecca, feel free to hop in and answer. It looks like the answer to your question, Jan, is dyslexia is the cohort beginning 2024-2025.
Hey, Christy?
Yes, ma'am.
Hey, I was asking, like you were said, if they don't have the 5 years prior to applying for the level certificate teaching, used to they had to, you know, they'll give it OS1 now for 1 year. Does that, see, like the PLs, they haven't taught for 1 year either. So will they be issued an OS1 when we apply for them?
If they're on a PL, they'll get in-state certification.
No, if they're for like Grand Canyon, we have to apply for them in out of state.
Right, but they won't be on a PL.
Okay, so they'll be get the OS1.
So if they just completed their program, that they're doing their coursework in the last 5 years, so they wouldn't be applicable to that OS1.
Okay, all right, that's what I need to know. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. All right, I know we have taken up far too much of your time. If you have any other questions, feel free to send them to certification@la.gov. We'll be happy to answer them for you, or you can email me directly. We can answer them for you. The last few slides are the updates to upcoming meetings, holidays, those kind of things. And then of course we have our section, that's our appendix, that has all of the previous month slides around legislative updates, around policy updates, you know, like that school nurse, we're no longer issuing those either beginning August 1st. So all of those reminders are in there. Please feel free to take a look and scroll through those to make sure that you have all that information.
Christy, when will the most recent version of 746 become available?
So the policy that was adopted in August was adopted emergency rule and notice of intent. And so the entire bulletin won't be available until it comes off of notice of intent until like January 20th. Or you can go to the Bessie website, and they have a rulemaking docket where you can look up the policy that was approved in the language, but it's going to be that strike through and underline, and it's going to leave out anything that was not changed. So, you know, it can be a little bit tricky to read.
I would suggest taking the out-of-date policy off of the state website then.
Well, it's on the Bessie website. And
no, it's on teachlouisiana.net. The August 23 version is posted there, and that's not correct.
Well, it's correct for some things, it is. It's just not correct for the recent update. And we usually link to the Bessie website, but we can remove that link if it's confusing. We can absolutely remove it. It'll still be available on the Bessie site, though.
Yeah, Kyle, if you want to email me directly with those, because I'm still overseeing the content displaying on Teach Louisiana. So if you want to send me those web pages, I can make sure that it's linked directly to the Bessie site, because that's where the bulletin is published by the registrar.
Yeah, but the link to the Bessie site is not going to show the updated version, and I think that's what he's talking about. Our link goes to Bessie, and Bessie doesn't have the emergency rule document there. It's just got the version that has come off of notice of intent. All right. Thank you all for joining today. And it looks like somebody had a question about the Bessie site. So I will pop that link into the chat. If you're looking for the rulemaking docket, this is it here specifically. And then of course you can go to the homepage and it has all things Bessie located there. All right, thank you all for joining. Y'all have a good afternoon.